Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji.
Welcome back to another episode of The Deconstructed Woman with Elisa Marie and Joji. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that I think every family goes through at some point in their time together. And that is, are we ready to get a pet? Do we want an animal in the house? Are the kids old enough? Would it be a distraction? Would it be helpful? If we're not going to have any other kids, do we get a pet now? So those are all the things that I think of when I think about the conversation my family had about getting a pet. And so this is something that is very relatable to Alyssa and her family right now. So we thought that it would be a fun discussion to have about the pros and cons about bringing a pet into the family life. When is the right time? When should you avoid it? And all the things that go along with that. So I'm going to send it over to Alyssa, and she's going to fill in some of the pieces of why this is a timely discussion.
Yeah, so for us, I think we've said in the podcast before, so I have 4 kids ranging in age. My oldest is 9, my youngest is 7 months. And the topic of whether or not we're ready for a pet had come up in kind of discussions the last couple of months. And I haven't told too many people, so now we're just opening this for people to chime in, both in my personal and over the podcast wave, because I think that a lot of the people that I have told have had very strong reactions to that of like, why would you get a pet? That's just adding one more thing to your plate, and your plate's already full with 4 kids. And so it was obviously there's that camp, if you will. And then the other side of it was a pet is so beneficial to a family and to kids in particular, to have them have that responsibility to gain the benefits. And I think I know, Georgie, you have pets of your own. And so I know growing up for me, I grew up with cats, so I didn't grow up with dogs, but that was a lot of my childhood, was spending time with pets or animals and just having that companionship, but also the benefits of when I was having a hard time being able to pet my cat or play with the neighbor's dog, or just again, looking at the benefits that can have, developing empathy and understanding life and death. There's just so many benefits to having a pet, but whether or not that the pros outweigh the cons in some ways. And so I think that was a discussion for us, and what we decided, or the next steps for us, were that we were going to foster a pet. So it wouldn't be long term, but to get us acclimated to it and try it out and see if that is a good fit for us, and then go from there, because it was hard to know if some of the things that you mentioned, are the kids old enough? Are we ready for this? How long do we wait? Do we wait till the kids are teenagers and they've got one foot out the door, and then that's our pet, not their pet? I think that there's a lot of different questions.
Yeah, I do have 2 dogs, and that's because I married a man who'd always had a dog. And so that was introduced to my life. And I have to say, looking back at it, those are really, I think, of having a single child, an only child in our house, it was something that we were hoping would take the place of a sibling, honestly. And that's really why we started discussing it. And Neela was very interested in having a pet. And I think most kids are. I don't think I've ever heard of a child who says, I don't want a dog or a cat or guinea pig, whatever. And so I think that kids start from a very young age hoping to have something to love, to take care of. And in their innocent little minds, that's really what they want, is some kind of companionship or something to love, I think, is really at the center of it all. I actually didn't grow up with any animals. And so in my family, we didn't have any pets. And so it was completely foreign to me. You having cats, when you were growing up, you know what that feels like, to have a confidant that can listen very intently and soothe your feelings and help you deal with sadness or heartbreak or loneliness or whatever. Animals are so great for all of that. And so I didn't have that growing up. So when I got married or with Dan and he had a dog, I think it was more of a place of, oh, am I going to be able to do this? And then by the time we had said in our minds that we wanted, I'd read a lot of stuff that said your children should be at least 7 years old before you bring an animal into the home. And I'm not sure I agree with that. It just as long as you know your children and you don't think that they're going to be hurtful to the animal. But yeah, I think seven, I feel like that was just pulled out of the air. I know a lot of larger families that do have animals. I don't fully understand the explanation of that, but I think that there's some reasoning behind it in terms of teaching responsibility and things like that. And I know that Alyssa, when you mentioned it to me, I was like, oh my gosh, I was part of the camp of, is it going to add to the chaos? And do you understand it's probably going to fall on your shoulders once again? And I probably was that. But as I thought about kids and animals, I do think that it is one of the most beautiful relationships that you can have is between young children and animals for sure. And I hate to say that I probably started out in that camp. I think I've moved to the other camp at this point. But are you on the waiting list to foster animals right now, Alyssa?
So we're not quite there. We are on the list. We have taken the next steps. It took a lot of researching, and I don't know, research was like part of it, but it was also just soul searching and whatnot and trying to figure out what this looks like because we have a pretty full plate. And so I had said, I think one of the best things I did is we went to an adoption event and I talked to a lot of foster parents who have foster dogs and cats. And I asked them, hey, this is our circumstance. I went to a couple of humane societies and said, we have 4 kids, the youngest of which is 7 months old. Am I crazy to want to bring a pet into the home? And I think that these are people who are working with animals day in and day out. And for them, they were like, no, but it can really create quite a lovely dynamic, especially your younger kids being acclimated to dog, because that's what we're looking at is dog, not a cat. But they said that there's a couple of things you need to look at. So we need to look at breed. We need to look at age. They said definitely you should not take a puppy home, which has bummed because they're so cute. But they were like, yeah, you don't want a puppy because you're already getting up at night with a baby and you're going to have to do the same thing when you're housebreaking a dog. And we learned through that process of talking with people who know animals. And so we're at this point in the process, we've talked to them, we've gotten on the list, and then we're just having to tell them when we're ready. And I think that hopefully we'd be ready in the next six months or so. But I think that timing, it plays a lot of into it. And I think that's when some people are thinking about getting a pet, timing is of the essence. Right now, the kids are finishing up school in a week. They're going into the summer months. They'll be at camp all day. We'll be at work. There's not going to be anyone home to care for any type of pet that we brought into the house. And it's going to be like late nights because I have to pick them up after work. So there's a lot of that to be considered. And so it's okay, maybe it's not the best timing because there aren't any kids that can stay home. They're not at the age where they can stay home on their own. So that's a piece of it. And again, we have a 7-month-old. So obviously we are looking at certain breeds that would be good, compatible with us small children, because pretty much all our kids are pretty small. So I think that there's a lot of factors that go in, and that's what I've been learning. And I think I've probably said before, you and I have talked about it, that when we have a dilemma or a challenge in front of us, we just absorb a lot of knowledge. And so that's what I did is, okay, I got a bunch of books from the library and okay, let me figure out what this looks like and make the best decision. And I couldn't find any books on, you have a bunch of kids, should you get a dog? That would have been a great book. So I don't think I'm going to write it, but I definitely think that's a topic that you don't hear so much about because I tried to Google it and find information. I didn't see it.
It's interesting. I do know that when my brother and his wife got their first dog, Riley, she's a lab mix, and she was also not a puppy. She wasn't very old. Maybe she was 4 or 5 years old, very playful still at that time. And I know that makes sense now why somebody told you that getting a puppy would not be a good idea, because that is really a difficult thing to do because they do need to be taken out and potty trained. And it's just like potty training a child. You have to get them to understand and build a connection. And it takes a lot of patience and it takes a lot of taking them outside. And even with a puppy in the beginning, they don't know how to manage a collar or a leash. And so you're teaching them how to get comfortable with that. And it really is dealing with a baby and trying to help them understand, and you're bonding with them. And of course, they love you and they're so cute. And that happens very quickly, but it is really a challenge. And then you brought up another question, which is something that I felt battle around for a long time. And that is, what do you do with your pet when you're working? So my dogs were crate trained and they were crated when we worked and my daughter was at school. And so that is a really hard thing to know, because then your dog is in a crate all day long and they don't get any interaction. And there's different camps around that. I know a lot of people nowadays who take their dog to doggy day camp, but that's just as expensive as daycare for your child. And they weren't really that popular when they were always available, but they weren't popular. And I don't think financially I would have wanted to swing that. But there is the difficulty of, is there any staggered times that you're coming home? Or some people will pop home during their lunch hour and take the dog out and do something like that. Or they'll arrange for a dog walker in the middle of the day. And those are a lot more available now as well. But yeah, it is a really tough decision because they really get excited when you're home because they've missed interacting with people. And the biggest difference between dogs and cats that I've heard is that dogs really miss their owners and they missed their family and their group. And so it really is a challenging thing. And just you don't spend a lot of time with your kids after you come back from work. You also only have 4 to 5 hours with your dog as well. And so it is something that I have felt really bad about and guilty about for a long time before Dan retired, because that was like a reality for us. We would crate them in the morning and our dogs were crated for 8 hours. I did not come home and take them out, and they get trained that way and they're good at it. But then breed is also really important, and male versus female dogs. In my experience, female dogs are much easier to train and they also don't mark. And so that was a frustration that I had when we got a male dog, was that was something I wasn't prepared to. We adopted a male dog from somebody at work and I didn't even think about the breed or anything, didn't do any research on it, and found the breed that was pretty stubborn to train. And then having a male dog where we'd only had female dog, the dog marked the couch in places, and that was really frustrating to me because I really didn't know what to do to change that behavior, and then we weren't really home, and it was a whole to-do. And yeah, there are definitely some things that, and the more you talk to a vet about the breed and what's good, I think is also really helpful because it does help steer away some of the problems that you can have. And also barking. We live in a neighborhood full of dogs, and you can always tell when a dog is walking by because every house there's a dog that starts barking. And so you can hear it like around the block. You can hear all the dogs barking. And some dogs bark more than other dogs, and some dogs, based on their size, sound a lot scarier than the little yappy ones. And so there's so many parts to it that you don't think about, because it's wonderful to have a dog. And I love having my dogs. And now that my husband is retired, it's a lot easier because they have him all day long, and they have a very tight bond because they follow him around everywhere. And anytime anybody's approaching the house, they turn the alarm on and they let him know somebody's coming. And so it's an interesting kind of a thing. And I do think that there's so many positive things that children have as a result of having a pet. I know my daughter is extremely animal focused. She has a cat of her own. She doesn't have a dog because she's away from home for hours on end, and cats do better with that than dogs do. But her cat is a little standoffish, and she's used to unconditional love by dogs. And so there have been times where I think that has been harder for her, because even when she comes home now, both the dogs clamor all over. She's a celebrity. They all can't get enough of her. And so dogs and cats are also very different. I know you guys are thinking about a dog. And then the timing factor you mentioned, it's so hard because when I think about 6 months from now, I think about taking a dog out in the winter and when it's cold outside and having to put all those layers on. Being in the spring and summer is easier because you're not putting the layers of coats, mittens, hats on before you take the dog out. And so, yeah, I think that you just jump into the deep end when it's time and you just figure it out as you go, because I don't think there's one path for any specific person or family. I think you guys have to figure it out. There's so many. I know I feel like I've been a negative Nelly, but there's so many things to consider. Besides timing, Melissa, are you guys looking at anything else? You have any breeds that you're top of mind?
I think that that part is probably more challenging. I think that there's so many options out there that work. I'm a hands-on person that I really like that our community, I'm not sure if this is global or whatnot, but they have these adoption events where a lot of different rescues all come to the same event and you can actually meet the dogs and cats. I think the last one we went to, there wasn't as many cats, but there was a bunch of dogs. And so you could meet them and interact with them and see not necessarily specific breeds, I think we kind of gravitate towards, but I also have had to do research on what is high energy. A husky is going to be high energy. I'm not going to lie, since we're such Bluey fans, a blue heeler was definitely top of the list, but they are very active, energetic dogs and need a lot of running around time. And I was like, yeah, that's great, but we need something middle of the road that has energy when we want to go for family walks or runs, but that's able to also be more relaxed and laid back on the evening when we're trying to get the house settled for the evening routine. So I think that there's a lot of things that go into that. One of the other things or factors that came in, which was again a motivating factor for me, was that my husband has not grown up with pets. And so that was for me seeing him. So I've taken him to a couple of the adoption events and he's very standoffish. He doesn't really know what to do with them. And he's not sure. I think at one point, and I tell people this story and I hope he's not offended by it, but he was like, do I have to touch the dog? And I was like, yes, you have to touch them. You have to walk them. This is like a joint effort. This is a family member, but he doesn't quite get that. And I think that to me pushed me to want to have my kids have exposure to pets earlier because I didn't want them to not understand that concept. And I think he'll learn it. I think that you made mention of the fact that dogs have that unconditional love. I think that's something that once he experiences it and it's our dog and it's here in our home, he's going to see the benefits of that. And I can almost predict that he's probably gonna be like, this is my dog. So I think that there will be benefits, but he's not there yet to know that because he's never had that experience. He's never bonded with an animal to know what that looks like or the emotions that get intertwined with that. And so that's been a big motivator for me to say, hey, not only is this going to benefit our kids, it's going to benefit him to have that. I think everyone should have it. And again, I never owned a dog, but I was walking in the park earlier today and friends of ours have a new puppy. And I immediately got down on the ground and was playing with the puppy. And I'm just an animal person. So it just comes very naturally for me. But to see a person who it doesn't come naturally to, it's just a very interesting thing. So I don't know if you've had that experience or seen people. And I think, Joji, you said that you didn't grow up with pets. So I'm curious to hear what you're like, if that was an easy transition for you or something that you had to learn.
Oh, I definitely had to learn it. I totally understand your husband approach because I never had played with a dog or held a dog, walked a dog. So I didn't really know I didn't know the etiquette of it. I didn't know how to pick up a dog. And so it's so awkward depending on their size because some bigger dogs are all legs and you don't pick them up as much. And I remember when I went to the vet with the dog for the first time by myself, they knew I hadn't handled a dog before because I was more awkward than the dog was. And the dog was uncomfortable because I was picking it up awkwardly thing. And so, yeah, for sure. And before I had a dog, I never understood how people would allow a dog to lick them or plant kisses all over them or whatever, let them sleep in their bed and all of that stuff. And now I've become the worst offender of all of that. I kiss my dogs more than they kiss me. And I am definitely a dog person. And like you've said, now that I've had a dog, I've had a dog for almost 20 years and a variety of dogs for 20 years, that every dog I see is somebody to go make friends with. And so I do think it takes a little bit of time to become comfortable. But I think, like you said, once, like your dog will never disappoint you. There was a point probably 10 years ago when I would tell Dan, we'd have the perfect marriage if you reacted to the dogs do when I get home. They just start clawing at the door and barking and jumping up and down, and they're so happy to see me, and my husband sitting at his computer or whatever doesn't even turn around or acknowledge that I'm home, and I would say, "Oh, this is what I look forward to. Somebody's happy to see me." It's just they're so joyous to see you, and it's a wonderful feeling, and they give you such a source of comfort when they lay next to you, or I definitely know that dogs pick up on your mood, and so if you're sad or you're unhappy, they definitely come and lay with you and just make you feel like they understand, like they take care of you. And there's so much wisdom in their eyes and their facial expressions. And it just is such a beautiful thing. And you grieve them. I have never cried as hard as I did when we had to put down our first dog, whose name was Susie, which is a dog that my daughter named at 7. And she was alive from age my daughter was 7 until she was 21. And the thing my daughter was most afraid of was that she wouldn't be here to say goodbye to her dog. And so we kept really close tabs on the dog and my daughter. And when the time was coming near, it was definitely my daughter came back from college. And my daughter actually said, I think it's time to put her down because I think she wanted to be here. She didn't want her dog to suffer and she couldn't imagine worrying about her. And I think that's the kind of connection you get with a dog. And though it was a heartbreaking moment for both of us, it was also something that was beautiful because it was respecting the relationship with this dog and being there with her through her final moments. And it was hard for me to see my daughter go through that, but I was probably just as bad as she was because it was my first dog too. And she had been such a big part of our lives and all of those kinds of things. And so I do think that learning to grieve is also a lesson that we teach our kids. And you don't want, in many ways, they have shorter lifespans than humans. And you get to understand grief before the grandparent dies. And I think that's an important first step of that as well. And so you learn love and fear and sadness and all of that with your animal. And they are just such precious creatures. I do think that everybody needs to have an animal. So I do think your husband I don't think he will go through that experience feeling, oh, I didn't need a dog. They're really not what they're cracked up to be. They're wonderful. They're better than most human beings I know, to be honest with you. And so I really definitely think that it's a great attachment that they give you. And there's no surprise to me that the whole phenomenon of therapy dogs, comfort animals, has really taken off. And it's a big deal in college. There are a lot of kids who have support animals in college. And I understand it. I think it's a little bit more work for the owner when they're in college, but I get it. I understand why they can help that transition when separating from their parents is such a difficult first year thing. And so there's so many pros with it too. And so I don't even know what your original question was, Alyssa. I got lost in my own love for my dogs and missing Susie and stuff like that. But no, I didn't grow up with dogs and I quickly transitioned and now they are one of my most favorite things in the world are animals. I would say I'm not as comfortable with cats because they don't like to be cuddled and they don't like to be picked up and they are pretty standoffish and my daughter's cat is anyway. So it's a little bit to me, it's a lot more work. I think it's so much easier to go up to even a stranger dog and bond with that dog in like minutes versus a cat that isn't familiar with you. But yeah, the dogs definitely. I feel like every dog I meet is a friend of mine to be had. So I love dogs for sure.
I think it encompasses exactly what I was saying, that I think that's going to be a new experience for not only my children, but my husband, who's not had that in his life. And I already know that I'm immediately going to bond to whichever dog we bring into this house. And so I think that you've encompassed all of the things that, like, that I would like to build in our home. We have a lot of, I think the line that I've told to so many of this rescue and foster agencies is we have so much love to give. Like my kids love going to those events. They love playing with the animals. Like they just, there's nothing better than seeing their faces. And no matter how hard of a day it is, seeing that makes it that much easier. So I think in some ways it is there's going to be pros and cons to any situation, but I think that there is benefits. And I think that every family has to decide that. Every family has to decide, do the pros outweigh the con? Is this going to be beneficial for us? Are we going to, is it going to just be more than we can handle? And if that's the case, then obviously you have to make different choices.
Yeah, for sure. Some of the other questions I thought about, Dan and I just talked about this recently, was it would be great if we had a fenced in yard. We don't have a fenced in yard. And as a result of that, somebody's always got to take the dogs out. For a bigger dog, you could have a run, which is just a way to keep a dog attached to your patio or something and let them out. For small dogs like what we have a 9-pound dog and a 22-pound dog. You don't really, you shouldn't leave them out by themselves because they can be prey to coyotes and certain birds like hawks or things like that. And we have to keep an eye on our dogs because they are, especially Archie, who's 9 pounds. He's pretty tiny. And so he could be lifted and taken off by. I know in high school, one of my daughter's friends had their little dog attacked by a coyote, and the dog had to be put down, and that was pretty traumatic for the family. And so in these kind of areas where do have their coyotes, foxes, those are not unusual kinds of predators in the area, but just something to be mindful of. Obviously, if you have a fence, it makes it a little bit easier, but you have to keep your eye on your dog, and then you do have to take the dogs physically out and not just release them in the backyard. And then dogs are pretty smart about being able to let you know when they need to come back in. And there's all sorts of things that can help that. There's electronic fence that keeps your dog in the area, but that's something that needs to be added to your home and underground. Dogs wear a collar, and they know they can't. If they try to go outside of the electronic fence, they get shocked. Some people don't like that kind of a mechanism because they don't think it's good for the animal. It just depends on the family and what they want. There's definitely the cost factor of a dog, not only for the vaccinations and the annual kinds of things that you have to do. My husband and I joke that the dogs have a vacation budget as well, because one of the things because I didn't grow up with animals, really very few people in my side of the family have animals. So our dogs wouldn't really be welcome there because they don't know how to take care of them, or any experience they've had with dogs is the fact that they may make a mess in the house, or they're disruptive, or they're loud, or whatever. And so we board our dogs whenever we go on vacation or we go to Michigan. In St. Louis, they're a lot more friendly with dogs. And one of our family members actually has started like housing our dogs when we're there. And that feeds her need for dogs and to take care of our dog. And then traveling with dogs is also something we've had to get used to. One of our dogs, Archie, gets really anxious in the car. And so we have gotten directions from our veterinarian about how to help ease that anxiety for that drive over there. And there's all sorts of different things. There are dogs who have been rescued that have had a traumatic background. And so they are very fearful. They may be fearful of man. They sometimes are fearful of thunder or storms, and they get really nervous, might make a mess, might go under the bed. And that's part of the reason why we in my family, in my nuclear family, that we have only bought dogs from what we thought were reputable sellers, because the rescue just seemed like a harder way to go, just because with both of us working full time, we didn't have the ability to care for a traumatized animal. But I think that the shelters and the adoption areas are very honest about that. And so we were looking for some, and my daughter's cat actually had a traumatic experience, and that's why she's so fearful. And so she was tormented by an adolescent boy, the cat was. And so finally, when the adults realized that was happening, they decided that the best thing they could do out of love for this cat was to give the cat away. And then we took the cat. But some of those long-term consequences have been costly and also just time consuming for my daughter, because she does work 12 hours at a time, and the cat gets separation anxiety and then acts out and then makes all sorts of messes and things like that. And there's a lot to it. But I will say that once you adopt an animal, they do become part of your family. And it might take a little bit of time for it to be that way for everybody, especially those who have never had animals. But I remember the first time when one of Dan's dogs got sick and he was just so torn up about it. And I was still like adjusting to having an animal. And we didn't get a lot of testing done, but the vet thought that the dog had probably a brain tumor and was starting to have seizures. And so we put the dog down. And I remember this conversation with Dan about how would you treat a family member? You have to show that you have to do what's right for your animal. When they get sick, it's just like your family member getting sick. It's not like you just dump and run. You've got to see them through that. And so some of the times that's an expensive thing to do, whether you're getting x-rays done or blood work done, or some people do insulin every day. Some people do chemo for their dog. I had a friend of mine who I think was pretty rare. She wanted her dog to live for as long as possible. And she had a small poodle, and this poodle was, I think, 20 years old, and the poodle had a cardiologist at University of Chicago. Now that I think is excessive because I think that the dog's quality of life had exceeded what it needed to be. And I think you have to respect the longevity of an animal's life too and not let them be in pain or anything like that. So I do think that's something that you also have to learn. But that was something hard for me to understand. I just thought putting a dog down was like, okay, the dog needs to go down. You put him down until I did it. And then you realize how hard it is to do something like that. And so it is definitely a mixed bag. But I will say, and I know I've been talking for a long time, but as I think about my older years, I think about, will I have the energy or the desire to have an animal to get up and take the dog out when I'm 60, 65, 70 years old? Even though a dog would be the best companion ever and make me feel that I was cared for. I don't know if the amount of upkeep that they require is something that I'm going to be able to do. And my husband laughs at me because I've become the dog person in this couple. I'm the dog person now, and I love my dogs. They're the perfect child because they don't ever yell at you or want anything from you or hate you, which all kids do at some point in their life, which is natural and should make you feel like you're parenting correctly if your child hates you at some point. And animals are just completely there for you. And I would love to have one in my life forever, but I also don't know if I can do them justice as I get older. So I don't know. It's one of those things where I'm thinking about that now. And my husband can't imagine me without a dog. And I don't know if I can imagine myself being able to, maybe an older dog, a dog that probably matches my pace a little bit more. But at that age, I sound like I'm 80 now, but I'm just thinking ahead because I want to do what's right for this animal and not just because I need something in my life. So I don't know. There's a lot of, at every stage of your life, you have to think about what is going to change and how do you handle those changes when you introduce a new animal to your home. So I don't know. I might have just opened up a whole can of worms for you, Alyssa. But yeah, I was thinking about present and future.
Yeah, I think that's again, it's that cost benefit analysis. We're all kind of thinking about where does this fit in and what's the best thing? And I think some of that future planning and projecting into the future is what you have to do. So I appreciate all of your experiences as well as like you're transitioning to not being a pet person to being a pet person and all that comes into that because I think that there's probably a lot of people out there who maybe have the same experience or again are in that first camp of absolutely no pets. I think that it's similar to in some ways like whether people have children or not. I think that there's a lot of life choices that we make and we say yes this worked for me or no it doesn't, and I think that it definitely depends on the person and their family dynamic and all of that. So I appreciate having the opportunity to talk about this, and I hope that other people, maybe this opens up a conversation that you wanted to have with somebody else as well. So I'll hand it over to you to close this out, but I think that it's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one final thing I'll say is that if you were to ask my brother and his wife, who have 6 children, 2 dogs, 4 cats, and it's not at one point also had some fish in there in the mix, they feel that it's all worth it for them and that in certain ways they already have a lot of chaos. And so adding animal chaos is just rounds out the family and the love that their dogs have for their children and their children have for their dogs. They actually just put Riley down I want to say it was either last year or earlier this year. And Riley had lived to be very old. It was a lab mix, and she had a great life, and everybody grieved. Even I grieved Riley's passing because she was a great dog. And she tolerated when Gavin was probably 7, 8 years old and thought that this was his wrestling partner or wants to stop him by grabbing his tail. And Riley just was the most Yoda like dog there was. She just looked at him and she loved him and she dealt with it all. And yeah, it was, I think they would say, go for it. You're not going to, fostering, I think, is a great way to start. They didn't do it that way, but I think that it makes a lot of sense to see if everybody is ready and always have an opportunity. That's how we adopted Archie, was because the family adopted, they bought a puppy at the same time they had a toddler, and the toddler and the puppy would not get along. And so we ended up adopting Archie through a work friend of mine who was our dog therapist at the hospital. And she just had a puppy, and we fell in love with the puffball that is now Archie. And it is definitely doesn't always work, but there's also some common sense and research that you can do to not fall into some of the most common pitfalls. And I know you well enough to know that you researched that already pretty thoroughly. And whatever plan you guys make is going to be the right fit for you. With that said, I'll go ahead and close out this podcast. And like Alyssa said, if these are things that your family has navigated successfully, we'd love to hear from it. And if you have thoughts that we didn't cover, there's so much more to talk about. We'd love your insights about this. You can reach out to us at our Gmail account, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com, through our Facebook podcast, and reach out to one of us if you know us. We're happy to add your thoughts. We get a lot of people who reach out to us, don't want to go through Gmail or anything, but text us and give us feedback, and we try to share that with each other and our listeners when appropriate. We're signing off for now. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you liked this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.